So today we're going to break down a really powerful story. It's this incredible narrative that weaves together a high-stakes test of a prophet, a period of just complete divine silence, and the birth of one of Islam's most central figures, Fatima al-Zahra. Honestly, it's like part political thriller, part theological mystery. Let's get right into it.
Everything, and I mean everything, really kicks off with this one simple question. Try to put yourself in their shoes, right? You're a leader in 7th century Mecca. This new movement is popping up, and it's threatening your entire way of life, your whole political system. You have to know, is this guy for real, or is he a charlatan? The stakes couldn't be higher.
All right, so for years, the Prophet Muhammad's message had been spreading kind of quietly, but then it just explodes into the public square. And for the Quraysh, the tribe in charge, this wasn't just some friendly debate, no. This was a direct challenge to their power. They knew they had to do something, and they had to do it fast.
And the sermon we're drawing from really hammers this point home. The people in power were facing a full-blown crisis. This new faith was just spreading way too fast to ignore. So what was their solution? A public intellectual trap, something designed to prove, once and for all, that the prophet was an imposter.
So they do to some local Jewish scholars for advice, and together they cook up these 4 questions that were designed to be, well, impossible to answer. You see, these weren't your average trivia questions. They were about really obscure history, deep spiritual concepts, stuff from totally outside the local tradition. The thinking was pretty simple. Only a true prophet, someone with a direct line to God, could possibly know this stuff.
But before they even got to the questions, they tried a different approach: bribery. They offered him everything: money, power, you name it, if you would just quit. But his response, at least according to this account, was absolute. A total refusal. So with that off the table, they had to move on to their final gambit, the intellectual showdown.
So the prophet accepts the challenge, and he's confident, right? He promises he'll come back with the answers the very next day. But the next day comes, and there's nothing. Just silence from the heavens. And this public test of knowledge is about to turn into this grueling, very personal trial of faith.
I mean, just think about the weight of that silence. This is a man who reportedly got divine communication pretty much daily. So for him, this wasn't just a delay. It was a deafening, terrifying void. Days turned into weeks, and according to some accounts, weeks turned into months. And those promised answers, they never came.
And you can just picture the scene, can't you? His opponents were absolutely merciless. They jumped all over this silence. They started taunting him in public, saying, "See, your God has left you. He hates you now." The sermon really paints this as a moment of just profound personal pain and spiritual anguish, not just a political problem.
And then, finally, the silence broke. But the revelation that came down wasn't the answer to any of those 4 questions. No, it was something way more personal. It was an entire chapter of the Quran sent just to comfort the prophet in this dark moment. This verse, it's from the chapter known as Ad-Duha, and it just cuts right through all the noise, all the mockery. It wasn't an answer for his critics. It was a message directly for him. A powerful, direct reassurance that he was not forgotten and that God was not angry.
And right here, this is where the whole story pivots. The focus suddenly shifts. It's not about answering old questions from his critics anymore. It's about a divine promise for the future. God literally vows to give the prophet a gift so incredible that it will make him completely and utterly pleased. So, of course, the big question becomes, what on earth could that gift be?
And this is where we get to the real theological heart of the sermon. The argument it makes is that this amazing, promised gift, it wasn't a battle victory, it wasn't a kingdom, it was a person who would become the very center of his entire legacy.
Okay, now this is absolutely fascinating. The core of the sermon's argument here literally comes down to grammar. Check it out. The first verse, the promise, is in the future tense. He is going to give you. But a later verse speaks in the past tense. We have granted you. The sermon connects these 2 dots perfectly, arguing the second one is the direct fulfillment of the first.
So what is this al-Kawthar? It translates to the abundance. And in this interpretation, it's not a river in paradise or some abstract concept. It's a person, the prophet's daughter, Fatima. Her birth, the very next year, is presented as that divine gift, the one that would finally please the prophet by making sure his legacy and his family line would flourish through her. And this idea of her being so central is just powerfully reinforced in this famous tradition, the event of the cloak. So when God is asked to identify the holy people gathered under the cloak with the prophet, The divine answer is so telling. It doesn't start with the prophet. It starts with her. They are Fatima, her father, her husband, and her sons. The whole family is defined by their relationship to her.
To make this kind of abstract spiritual idea a bit easier to get our heads around, the sermon uses a really clever modern analogy. Think of it like this. If the prophet is a massive power plant, generating all this spiritual energy and blessing, then Fatima is the one essential connection point. She's the power plug that lets everyone else tap into that energy. But having that kind of elevated status, that kind of unique spiritual authority, well, according to the sermon, that's exactly what put a target on her back. The narrative argues that in the chaos after the prophet's death, her authority became a direct threat to anyone trying to grab political power.
And the sermon uses a pretty stark modern term to describe what happened next: regime change. The argument is that the goal wasn't just to replace one leader with another. It was to completely tear down the old system by cutting the community off from the prophet's family.
So, the central argument here is that to pull off this regime change, the new leadership had to neutralize that spiritual and political power coming from the prophet's own house. If we go back to that analogy, they had to destroy the power plug.
The sermon presents this quote as, well, pretty damning evidence. It's framed as proof that the new leadership knew that to make their own power stick, they had to deal with the spiritual authority centered in Fatima's home first. Her very presence was a fundamental challenge to their legitimacy. So when you trace this powerful narrative all the way from a public test to a very private promise and finally to a tragic conflict, it becomes so much more than just a historical account. For millions of Shia Muslims, this is a core foundational story that explains their theology, their history, and their identity to this very